everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my channel. As probably most of you know, besides doing historical costuming and cosplay, I am also an actress, and I've been performing in musical theater since I was 6 years old. I've shared a few videos on my channel with snippets of theater in them, such as my recent Day in the Life of an Understudy video, or my altering of a historical costume for theatrical quick changes video, and also my Edwardian women's fashion evolution video, which looked at all of the costumes that I planned to wear while playing Mother in the musical Ragtime last year. I'll link all of these videos down below in the description in case you have not yet seen them. Around the time that I posted that Edwardian video, I had a few requests come in asking for me to do a video centered on what costumes that I have actually made or worn for theater myself, and now I'm finally getting around to making that video. So in this video, I am going to share with you what costumes that I have made as like regular historical costumes, which I then wound up wearing in theatrical productions, what costumes I've made specifically for theatrical productions, which have then wound up in my historical costuming wardrobe, as well as a few costumes that I've actually made specifically for theater. I'll try to include as many pictures as possible of the various costumes as they were worn in the productions, but unfortunately, I really don't necessarily have pictures of all of them. First though, a little bit about my costuming background. I started to teach myself to sew the summer before my senior year of high school. I began with a couple of really simple projects, like a couple of skirts and a Hogwarts robe, before jumping in with my first big historical project, which was a Simplicity Renaissance dress pattern at number 9929, which I made out of stretch velvet. This also actually wound up being the first of all of the costumes that I made myself that then appeared on stage. I was in a community theater production of Once Upon a Mattress the following year, and since they didn't have a costume in their stock that would fit a plus-size actress, I wound up wearing this dress. The next year, I went away to college for my acting degree, and I also wound up taking a handful of costume-related courses, graduating with a minor in costume design. I also did work study in the costume shop, stitching on like simpler sewing projects and also dressing and serving as wardrobe mistress for the shows, which all amounted to really the only like actual sewing lessons that I've ever actually been taught other than at costume college. And although I did costume design one show while I was in school, The Importance of Being Earnest, for which I actually won the Best Costume Design Award of that year, I luckily didn't actually have to sew any of those costumes myself. So let's fast forward just a little bit to 2010, when I first started getting into actual historical costuming. The project that I consider to be my second historical costume, which was the second one that really fit correctly and was made on my own sewing machine at home as opposed to like the school costume shop, is this black check 1850s dress, which I initially made to attend Dickens Fair that year. You probably recognize this outfit if you have been around my channel since 2021, because I wore this dress while playing Jo in Little Women the Musical. The original costume consisted of a cartridge-pleated skirt, a Garibaldi blouse, and a pagoda sleeve jacket, and it has possibly actually been worn more than any other costume in my closet. And that's because Little Women was not the first time that this appeared on stage. In fact, it was the third time that I've worn this costume in a show. The first time I wore it was back in 2012 when it made a fairly brief appearance as my ensemble costume in Scrooge the Musical before I changed into the Ghost of Christmas Present for the rest of the show. And then it appeared again in 2016 when I played Lady Bracknell in Jekyll and Hyde. I've also worn it many times for various historical costuming events, as for quite some time it was actually my only mid-Victorian outfit. In 2012, I made a ball gown bodice with an attached overskirt, which corresponded with the base skirt. And I wore this ball gown look in Jekyll and Hyde without the quick rigged zipper. And then I added a quick rigging zipper so that I could do a very fast quick change in Little Women. The next oldest costume that I made that has appeared on stage is this Edwardian chiffon and lace ensemble that I originally made in 2011 for a picnic. This one managed to avoid appearing in Ragtime, mostly because it's honestly somehow too short now, but I did wear it when I was a Pick-a-Little Lady in The Music Man in 2018. The hat that I originally made for it was deemed too large for The Music Man, but that did make it into ragtime though, so it worked much better as a statement piece for Mother. In 2013, I made a 1780s riding habit that later wound up on stage in a rather different look. This was one that I also wore in the aforementioned production of Jekyll and Hyde, and in fact, I was murdered in it. Instead of wearing it like a riding habit would have been worn in the 1780s, I wore the zone front jacket bodice over a Victorian-style thrifted vintage blouse from my closet, along with the original wool skirt from the habit. I had created this version of this outfit to wear for SteamCon, and it worked with the rather eclectic feeling of our production. I totally forgot that I wore some historical costumes when I was in a production of The Who's Tommy in 2014 as well. I wore my 19-teens skirt in one scene, and I also wore that same sort of steampunk version of my 1780s riding habit in various combinations in a couple of other scenes. And frankly, when the costumer for that show showed me what absolutely atrocious outfits she had that would fit a plus-size actress, I literally piled a laundry basket filled with all of my potential costumes that I might have, and I brought it into the theater for her to choose from. Which is why those 3 costumes weren't the only ones that I wound up wearing. In fact, I also wore a 19-teens dinner dress that I have only ever actually worn on one other occasion, and frankly, I often forget that I own. I first started making this dinner gown in 2012, and it became one of my longer-lasting UFOs until December of 2015 when I finally finished it to wear to a Downton Abbey preview event. And these are still the only occasions that I've worn this outfit for some reason. Who knows? Maybe it will actually make an appearance in my next show, which is Titanic the musical. More on that later. Anyway, I think that covers all of my Jekyll and Hyde costumes, so let's jump to a production from the beginning of 2018. Oliver. This, I think, is the first costume that I made for a production, though I only made it because it happened to already be on my to make list for later that year. I played Widow Corney and I needed an 1830s outfit, and since I already had all of the fabrics, I made myself a lovely silk 1830s dress with a crazy lizard-frilled widow's cap, which I actually now typically wear as a 1780s cap instead. In the summer of 2018, I actually costumed a full show in Seattle, Disenchanted, which is a twist on the typical Disney princess stories. I don't normally costume for theater since most theaters just don't pay enough, and I'm only willing to work for union wages as a costumer. And while I stitched and dressed for a few shows at professional houses back in 2014, this was the first show that I actually costumed myself. Now, I wasn't the designer since they were using the original designs from the off-Broadway run, but I was in charge of sourcing all of the materials and patterns to recreate these designs, delegating some of the builds to a couple of the other stitchers, and making a couple of them myself, as well as fitting the actors and being present during tech rehearsals. I wound up making all of Cinderella's costume and the Little Mermaid's Rip-Away's tail, and I also did some tweaks and finishings on some of the other costumes, including Jasmine's flying carpet. But anyway, back to the costumes that I have worn on stage. So later in 2018 was the production of The Music Man that I mentioned earlier in this video. Although there were a couple of costumes that were made for us, including one of my favorite theatrical costumes that I've ever gotten to wear, which were these absolutely adorable gym uniforms designed by our costumer Judy Brooks. I also wore my 1890s ice cream social blouse and skirt, which I had made just a few months earlier for Costume College that year. Also in 2018, I wore this vintage style dress that I made, which I wore as Mrs. Snoring Man in White Christmas, along with a vintage coat from my closet. I had made the dress just a month or so before that for my Merida Dapper Disney bound look for a trip to Disneyland. I had almost forgotten that I also wore this dress in that production of White Christmas, which is actually based on an extant 1955 Jean Dessay cocktail dress that I saw in the V&A back in 2008 and then made in, I think, 2011. This is actually the only time in White Christmas here that I've ever worn this dress for anything. In 2019, I wore another vintage style dress that I had made, which was a butterick pattern, which I think was supposed to be a more complicated version of the Simplicity walkaway dress, which I wore wore when I played Jenny in the flashback scenes of Big Fish, the musical. I had made this dress back in 2016 because I really liked the pattern envelope, but I absolutely do not recommend this pattern as it is basically a fitting nightmare. Due to a little disruption in the theater world, cough, pandemic cough, I wound up not needing to wear any of my own costumes again until Little Women in the fall of 2021. I think I talked about these costumes at least a little bit back when I was in that show, but because I played both Jo and Meg in the show, switching off nights with another actress, and because I personally find that costume is such an important part of inhabiting a character, I decided that I really needed different costumes for Meg than what I wore as Jo. I've already told you earlier about the costumes that I wore as Jo in the show, but for Meg, I wore one costume that I had already owned, and then I made a second costume specifically for the show. The one I already had was my 1840s dress, based on the Angela Clayton McCall's pattern, which I had made for Costume College back in 2019. This worked really well for Meg to wear to the ball, since she's actually supposed to be wearing a hand-me-down dress from Marmee. The other costume was a bodice and skirt combo that I attempted to make in a day and honestly almost succeeded. I have a whole video about that project, so I'll just link that video up here and also down below in the description if you want to check that out. I also made an apron for Meg to wear, which I then also wound up wearing in ragtime, but I will get back to ragtime in just a minute. In early 2022, I played the baker's wife in Into the Woods, and my costume came partially from me and then partially from the costumer. The one piece that I wore that I made was this rust-colored velvet bodice, which I had actually made to go with my Christmas gunny sacks dress a month or so before. And while I didn't love the bodice with the gunny sacks dress, it worked really great for the baker's wife. But back to ragtime. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I actually was basically given free rein to costume myself for ragtime. And as the only wealthy principal female, I luckily didn't have to blend in with the rest of the ensemble, which meant that I could basically just pull all of my Edwardian clothes from my closet. And because the story covers about like 10 or so years as it travels through the first and second acts, and because Mother goes on really quite her own transformational journey throughout the course of the show, I was really able to develop the character through the use of my costumes. I made myself 1.5 new costumes for the show, a navy suit consisting of skirt, jacket, and corset type wide belt, as well as a lilac lace-trimmed lightweight Edwardian skirt. In addition to those, I also pulled several looks from my costume closet. I started the show in a Swiss dot skirt that I had made in 2021, paired with a shirtwaist that I had made in 2020, and the large Edwardian hat and also the velvet sash from that outfit that I made back in 2011. Then I changed into the lilac skirt with the apron from Little Women. Then I wore the new Edwardian suit, and then did a couple of combos of those all together. In the second act, I began with the navy skirt from the suit over a slimmer cut summer 19 teens dress that I had made back in 2018 for a local event. Then I wore just that white slim dress paired with a hat that I had made for an 1890s ensemble in 2021 that went with the Swiss dot skirt. And finally, I changed the dress out for a linen 19 teen skirt that I had made in 2012, paired with a history-bounding blouse that I actually found at Old Navy. For full details on the complete transformation and character evolution, do be sure to check out that full video on it, which I have linked up here and down below in the description. I've only done 2 shows since Ragtime last year, and while I did provide a couple of my own pieces for Singin' in the Rain, they were not ones that I made. And for Cinderella, I had the joy of working at an equity theater where they provide all of the costume pieces, accessories, and even shoes and undergarments for you. So I think that about covers everything that I've ever made that has appeared on stage. There have been a few other shows where I have worn modern pieces pulled from my own closet, but I think this is everything from my actual costume wardrobe. Personally, I feel a bit lucky that I have been able to costume myself so often with pieces that I already had, as so many plus-size actresses are basically forced to wear whatever unflattering and ill-fitting pieces that theater costumers have access to. In my opinion, it is absolutely atrocious that this is the case, and I think it provides a lot of anxiety for plus size women in theater, which is so often already such a sizist atmosphere, where plus size people are frequently made to feel less than their slimmer fellow actors. All I can hope for is that since theater has started to make strides in other areas of historical inequality, we will someday see less sizeism happening on our stages as well. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this look at all of my theatrical costumes. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, I have a feeling that more of my costumes may be making an appearance in my next show, Titanic, not the movie, which will be performing at Tacoma Musical Playhouse from mid-April through early May. I'll leave a link to the tickets in the description if you are interested in attending, and please do let me know if you do attend so that I can say hi afterwards. If you liked this video though, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon, and if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week, with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and other random costuming content like this out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram, that's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have links to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks right here on YouTube. I'd also like to take this time to say a humongous thank you to all of my wonderful patrons. I seriously could not produce this much content without you, my patrons, and you all mean the world to me. An especially big thank you to all of my patrons at the Romantic, Victorian, and Edwardian level tiers, who are Sharon, Mirage, Laura, Jean, Audra, Emily, Kim, Linda, Marie, Sarah, Saracen, Tiffany, Denise, Liz, Kimberly, and Nurse Anita. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you all for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!